Colonel Richard Kemp, former head of international terrorism intelligence at the UK Prime Minister's office. Hi, thank you for joining us this morning.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be with you again.
So, Colonel Kemp, more than a year and 3 months into the war, and given your extensive military background, how do you think it should end, and what role do you think Trump could play in this?
Well, I think in many ways the game will change when Trump comes into the White House, because although the Americans have been extremely supportive of Israel since this war began, they've also, in many ways, have hampered Israel's efforts by placing numerous restrictions on them, applying a partial, at least, arms embargo on Israel, and effectively preventing Israel from carrying out some of the actions it needs to carry out. I think that, I hope anyway, I don't have any inside knowledge of it, but I hope that that situation will change when Trump comes into the White House, freeing Israel to be more aggressive, let's say, than it has been up to now, particularly in relation to Iran, which of course is the key to the whole conflict.
Colonel Kemp, what advice would you give to Israel's leadership as it navigates the current geopolitical challenges?
Well, I don't think Israel's leadership needs my advice. I think, as far as I can see, the IDF and the Prime Minister's office and the Ministry of Defense in Israel have been doing an extraordinary job in a very, very demanding and complex situation. I do believe that, as I mentioned just before, the key to the conflict is Iran. Iran has been severely damaged by the destruction of Hezbollah, the partial destruction of Hezbollah, the partial destruction of Hamas, and the loss of Syria, all of which are down to Israeli actions. And I think now it's the next major target, really, for Israel's offensive should be directly against Iran itself.
This is the main goal, the main target, Iran. I want to ask you a personal question. I saw on your Twitter X account, someone wrote to you in response to one of your posts, "That's all true, Colonel, but you may have signed your own death warrant with that post." Have you received threats to your life because of your support for Israel?
I have, yes, many threats to my life. And also not just for my support to Israel, but also for the work I've done in the past on attempting to counter Islamic State and al-Qaeda. And my name was found on a al-Qaeda death list in Syria a few years ago. I also receive, very, very rarely does a day go past without me receiving on social media severe threats against me and my family as well, as a result of my support for Israel. I personally take this as being, in many ways, a compliment, because I'm angering the people that need to be angered, and I'm attempting to tell the truth about a situation that's so often distorted in the Western media, and particularly on social media. And so I think at least I'm doing, it's not my job, but I'm in many ways I'm doing my job by annoying these people.
So it won't discourage you from supporting and advocating for Israel?
If anything, it will encourage me even more to continue supporting Israel, which is, as I see it, Israel's cause is an extremely just cause. Israel is the victim in this war. But it's not just a war against Israel, it's also a war against the West. It's striking against all of our Western values. And when you, for example, look at protests in the UK and in the US and other countries which actually support Hamas, they may not say they do, but the practical effect is to support Hamas. You will never see a British or an American flag flying. You'll only see Palestinian flags flying. In fact, they burn American flags and they burn British flags in their protests supposedly against Israel.
Yes, you mentioned Iran. I want to ask you about another player in the area, Turkey. With the many regional changes and challenges, could Israel find itself in direct confrontation with Turkey, with Erdogan, in your assessment?
Well, I think Turkey has gained an immense strength as a result of the fall of Assad. Obviously, the fall of Assad was a good thing for Syria, but he's been replaced by a regime, or partially at least replaced by a regime that is a jihadist regime with connections to al-Qaeda and the Islamic State. And there's every probability that if that regime is maintained and gains more control, you'll have a really negative jihadist state on your doorstep. And that state, of course, is supported by Turkey, or the HTS, the organization that's now largely in control of Syria, is supported by Turkey. Turkey there will be a major player in Syria. And Turkey, of course, is a supporter and sponsor of Hamas. Maybe they will replace Iran as the main supporter of Hamas and other anti-Israel jihadist groups in the region. So, yes, I think there's a big danger from Turkey. I would hope it would descend into direct conflict between Israel and Turkey, although that's a possibility. I think we're going to see much more of a Turkish-motivated proxy war, maybe accelerating against Israel from Syria.
Interesting, Colonel Kemp. So I've asked you about the macro challenges. I want to ask you about the micro challenges. We are seeing more and more attempts to sue IDF soldiers in various countries around the world. How can Israel address this issue?
Yeah, and this is partly a product of weakness in Western governments for actually standing up and telling the truth about what's been going on in Israel. The Western governments like Britain and the US know exactly what Israel's doing, yet they also do criticize Israel for infringing human rights and carrying out unnecessary killings. And that, of course, fuels the anti-Israel sentiment, which, as I just mentioned, which also directly supports Hamas, encourages Hamas, and also, of course, targeting Israeli soldiers is part of that. So I think it's without a doubt incumbent on Israel to use whatever diplomatic means it can to try and combat any legal action in Western countries, but also down to Western governments. And I think, again, with Trump coming into the White House, I think we're going to see, we're likely to see that problem potentially reducing, at least in the United States. And, for example, we've just seen a bill pass in Congress to sanction the International Criminal Court for its egregious arrest warrants against the Prime Minister, your Prime Minister, and against the former Defence Minister. So I'm slightly optimistic on that front from the 20th of January.
And speaking of Western governments, let's turn to the situation in Britain. The topic of grooming or rape gangs has sparked heated debates in the UK. Is there still hope for the UK, or has political correctness triumphed?
Well, you're absolutely right when you attribute at least part of this problem to political correctness. We've had decades of paedophile rape gangs of young, sometimes as young as 11, 12-year-old white girls in Britain being targeted by street rape gangs, mainly by Pakistani men, but also, at least in one case, Pakistani women assisting in procurement of some of these white girls. And there have been prosecutions in recent years in the UK, but it's been going on without prosecution for a very long time, partly because the authorities have refused to engage properly with this. And that's mainly as a result of political correctness and prioritizing a fear of inciting or causing racial tensions as a result of identifying the reality of these Pakistani rape gangs in the UK, prioritizing that over actually stopping it from happening and bringing justice to the offenders. It's in recent days, actually, this has become a major topic in the news, probably the top of many news stations in the UK. And hopefully we're going to see that causing, much more effective action against these rape gangs. I'm happy to say that Elon Musk, although in the US, been criticized heavily by many here in the UK for involving himself in UK politics, he's played a major role in highlighting this problem, and hopefully will also be a contributor to the action that occurs.
And we see that senior government officials, including the Prime Minister, are involved in this issue. Is the British public waking up?
The British public is certainly waking up, and it's not before time. There have been a great deal of suppression of this by the police, by local authorities, local councils, social services, and by the British government. And it's not just the current British government, but successive British governments have been afraid to tackle this. And by doing so, they've actually encouraged the continuation of these horrible, horrible events, which are probably the worst atrocity that has occurred in the UK since the Second World War. And even now, the Labour government that's in power has refused to launch what's been demanded, which is a full-scale national inquiry into the problem overall, which affects many, many different parts of the UK. It's across the UK. And hopefully sufficient pressure will be applied to them now to force their hands. They shouldn't need to be forced. It's their duty to deal with it, and they should have dealt with it long before. But let's hope that changes now.
Colin Richard Kemp, thank you so much for your time this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much.